Local action for climate change, our way to low-carbon cities. And our final speaker is Brent Toderian, who is the City Planning Director of the City of Vancouver, Canada.
I'll start by saying it's somewhat intimidating for any North American city, I think, to go last on a panel like this, but perhaps it's appropriate because increasingly Vancouver is striving to benchmark ourselves against the best global cities in all aspects of Ecocity or green city building. So if we don't look reasonable by comparison to our global colleagues, then we're not doing the job well enough yet, and we certainly do have high standards for ourselves as a city. On behalf of the City of Vancouver, I'd also like to thank and compliment the organizers. It's been a wonderful conference so far, and our thanks to our Canadian sister city of Montreal for being such a wonderful host. We were told to keep, the one rule we had for this panel was to keep to 6 slides maximum. And my friends all broke that rule, and I too will break that rule. But in trying to figure out how to keep close to 6 slides, I think I have 9 or 10, I had to think about what I would want to say on this panel. And I'll say that I won't be showing a lot of images about what's been characterized as the Vancouver model of city building. I showed a lot of slides to that effect at 5 o'clock yesterday when we talked about built form an awful lot more. What I decided to do this morning is talk about issues of high-level city building and how city building itself is intrinsically connected to our achievement of climate change, and that really does characterize the Vancouver attitude. So it's about will, it's about leadership, particularly within the North American context, and it's about a consistent vision implemented over time to achieve our actual goals. One of our first speakers, Janice Perlman, said to plan is human, to implement is divine. I would say to plan and implement in alignment, where you're actually implementing the thing you visioned in the first place, is even better. And unfortunately, too many North American cities see a fundamental disconnect between what we plan and what we end up implementing. And that's one of the real reasons as North American cities we haven't made enough progress towards city building. I also wanted to say, while we've been having this conference, there have been several things happening across Canada that really bring home some of our challenges. David talked about the critical and scary realities of sea level rise, but of course we also have to mention extreme weather events. And while we've been at this conference, Goderich, the town of Goderich, had its first tornado. I believe it's its first tornado. Gary Davidson, the former director of planning for Goderich, is somewhere in the audience. He and I had a brief chat. And that's shocking that a town in this part of Canada could see that kind of extreme weather event. Richard Register and I were having breakfast reading the paper this morning, and one of the headlines said, "Winnipeg is melting." They're at 37 degrees Celsius. For those of you who don't work with Celsius, that is really hot. And yet another broken record, and we constantly are seeing these broken records. So long before sea level rise becomes an issue, all of us in terms of city building have to address the very real, very now issue of extreme weather events, both in terms of frequency and intensity. And I was somewhat gratified in the airport on the way here to pick up the new issue of Scientific American, which is the cities issue. And unlike previous issues that I've seen, which talk about Masdar and things like hovercrafts and jetpacks and how technology will save us, this entire issue is about good city building, in my opinion. And to have the scientists join the city planners and the climate scientists and the doctors to add to the commonwealth of voices that talk about cities being the solution to these things. It's very, very interesting. You should pick up this issue. And it shows that the real technology that will save us is good progressive city building, which is a very old, well-understood technology. It's not an issue of lack of knowledge, we often say as cities. It's usually an issue of lack of will or a disconnect between your vision and your implementation. So with that, I'll jump into the slides I did choose to focus on. In Vancouver, we, as Jan said in the first day, like to kill many birds with one stone. And to put it even more ominously, we are facing a perfect storm of issues like most Canadian and global cities are. So climate change is just one of many issues that we're actually struggling to address in our holistic approach to city building. whether it's an aging population, housing affordability, which is certainly a significant issue in Vancouver, and public health issues, etc. We're increasingly connecting the dots between these various issues and showing how city building, advanced urbanism, progressive and counterintuitive approaches to city building are the way we address these convergence of issues. Other cities have gotten attention for things like their green roof approach or their bus rapid transit approach or their green buildings approach, and yes, indeed, we're doing all of those things. But we think the real approach to Vancouver city building is about a holistic, comprehensive approach to city building, which is much more comparable to European cities, unfortunately, than it is to most North American cities. In our creation of will, it started quite early with our political leaders in this document called Clouds of Change back in the 1990s. So we were one of the very early adopters from a North American perspective about connecting climate change to our city building approach. And the follow-up Climate Change Action Plan actually made a statement that really still reflects how we perceive the solution to climate change. It says, the most important long-range strategy for managing housing and transportation, greenhouse gas emissions, is land use planning, density, design, and land use. You can get all the details right, but if you get the fundamental wrong, your density approach, your land use approach, and your design approach, you're probably not going to get the gains you need to get. And thankfully, our predecessors in Vancouver got this right very early on. So where we've gotten to from then, and I'm sorry this slide cut off a little bit, it's one of my colleagues from another department who put it together, and he has a flair for the dramatic, as you can see. But what this does show in a comprehensive way is, first of all, we have the lowest per capita greenhouse gas emissions of any city in North America. I see estimates ranging from 4.6 to 5 tons per person. It varies significantly across the city and indeed the region. But what this shows is we've actually already reduced our greenhouse gas emissions below 1990 levels. And our 1990 levels was already lower than North American standards. But we are on track by 2012, which is our goal, to actually achieve the Kyoto Protocol, which is 6% below our own 1990 levels. Not the North American 1990 levels, which is much higher, but our own City of Vancouver 1990 levels. And we've already got, as I said, the lowest per capita emissions. So this has been as a result of generations over multiple political leaderships to achieve a singular goal, which is to be originally a more livable city, emphasizing the city for people that Jan talks about, but always with this idea quietly, before sustainability was a popular word, of also being sustainable at the same time as being livable. Because, of course, the two philosophies are completely synergistic. So this is where we are in terms of our greenhouse gas emissions. You see that it did pop up indeed, and these are absolute levels, by the way. So as you can see, we are on target and dropping to meet Kyoto protocols over time. And this notwithstanding significant population increases. We are a growth city, one of the fastest growing cities in North America, and yet as an absolute number, not just on a per capita basis, as an absolute number, our greenhouse gas emissions are reducing. We know how it plays out over the city in terms of density and land use mix directly relating to greenhouse gas emissions. Our lowest by far per capita greenhouse gas emissions is in our center city, in our downtown peninsula area. In fact, the only part of the city that on a per capita basis the climate scientists tell us is not contributing to climate change. I understand you need about 1.8 to 2 tons per person maximum to not be essentially contributing to climate change. So as you can see, the rest of our city, which is more low density, mid to low rise, is contributing to climate change and has more significant greenhouse gas emissions. So increasingly, much of our work is about the rest of the city, because we've done a pretty good job in our downtown from a greenhouse gas emissions perspective, but it is going into those established neighborhoods and having a meaningful dialogue about meaningful change to reduce all of our cities' greenhouse gas emissions across multiple neighborhoods in established neighborhoods. That is the real challenge of our next generation, because that's a lot harder than densifying the easy parts of your center city. To that end, our past council launched a term called EcoDensity, and we spent about 2 years defining what that meant. An incredibly hard discussion in a public sense to talk about what's been referred to as the D word, the third rail of municipal politics. Nobody wants to talk about D. Nobody wants to talk about density. We're often told, use a different word. It's not politically palatable to talk about density. But as our colleagues from around the world show, that's only true of North America. And most other cities embrace the concept, or certainly the dialogue and discussion about density. But for North America, this was very hard. And it became an incredibly active and controversial discussion, not an easy discussion at all. And that's what made it meaningful, because by the end of it, we did have a different sense about how density and greenhouse gas emissions and the ecology relate to each other in an urban sense. And I think we've come out of it as a much smarter city because of that. But boy, it wasn't easy, and our Councillor Cadman here can certainly attest to that. And it remains not easy. Density is still a very controversial and tough discussion in the city, but this was necessary. We did a number of things through EcoDensity that moved the bar quite extensively. We jump-started significant transit-oriented densification. We created our first LEED Gold, initially LEED Silver and now LEED Gold requirement for all private sector buildings in the city, a mandated district energy strategy for all developments above 2 acres. These are significant benchmark movers in our city building, which we're now, frankly, building on, because that was a few years ago. We're already trying to do something more aggressive, more progressive. To that end, our new council came in, our new mayor was elected, and he had even bigger ambitions. So eco-density, if it was the bedrock and basis for a green city, we still didn't have a good umbrella that encompassed all the aspects of green city building, including many of the things that aren't directly, at least, connected to densification, land use, and design. So he launched the Greenest City initiative, which challenged us to become the greenest city in the world by 2020. A very audacious and aggressive standard, especially when we're comparing ourselves to some of my colleagues on this panel today. But again, if it's something that is entirely deliverable, if you have the will, and if you're willing to really make the connections for implementation to that kind of goal. Is it going to be hard? Extremely hard. But we're very committed to doing it. And as you can see, the metaphor became, rather than one event in an athletic sense, it became a decathlon, where you look at every aspect of green city building, benchmark against the cities that are doing the best at that in the world, and try to improve. We recently were ranked the second greenest city in North America behind San Francisco. So that shows we even have our work to do in the North American context, but we are entirely committed to this goal. We see it, by the way, as a healthy and helpful competition. If we don't come in first, if my friend from Malmo wins, or my friend from Berlin or Shanghai win, we will congratulate them. But we all see this as a very healthy and progressive kind of challenge, where we're constantly drafting behind each other in a cycling sense to learn more and do better. We've learned a lot from our Athletes Village. I showed many more slides about Athletes Village last night. But this has set a new model for us. It, by the way, shows, as I said last night, that Vancouver isn't just about tall buildings and podium and point towers. We do very, very innovative and progressive mid-rise buildings, and that's frankly going to be the future of the majority of our city building within Vancouver. But this moved the bar on everything. This was a game changer. One of my great frustrations in cities is that they can have a model that is exceptional, but if you look at business as usual around that model, everything looks rather normal, rather ordinary. Before this project was even completed in terms of physical construction, it had changed our approach to passive design within our zoning bylaw, urban agricultural guidelines, district energy policies. Any aspect of city building you can think of that was implemented in this plan, by the time it was constructed, it had changed business as usual across the city. What good is a model if it doesn't change business as usual, if it's just an island of innovation in a city of business as usual? So that's also part of the attitude in Vancouver, where we take every model and we run with it and make sure that business as usual changes. It was referred to during the Winter Olympics last year as the greenest city in North America. LEED ND points, 83, the highest, just beating Dockside Green in our neighbor, Victoria. Our mayor called it the greenest city in the world. We didn't have the stats to back that up. I wouldn't argue with my mayor, but I was burdened at the time with the knowledge of developments like Malmo, BO1, and Hammarby, and Hafen City and such. And I know that there are we have a long way to go in terms of learning many aspects of community building and city building that will truly make us the best in the world, not just the best in North America. We, as part of our model, have long integrated land use and transportation. Unfortunately, too many North American cities still see these as separate issues rather than a completely synergistic interrelationship. Our engineering and planning departments are essentially joined at the hip. We co-manage and co-design almost every exercise. One of the speakers from Montreal yesterday suggested that the City of Montreal's land use plan and transportation plan had some inconsistencies, and he said that that was because they were developed by two different departments. I hope he was exaggerating, because certainly that kind of silo thinking is something that we fight against in Vancouver. So we have long had this interconnection between land use and transportation. As you've seen from some of our colleagues globally, though, our new grail is the complete integration of energy, not just as a supporter of density, but actually as a driver of urban form, as a determiner of where density and urban form should go and in what form that density should be achieved. This is the new sweet spot for us in terms of sustainable physical city building. I'll end with a statement we frequently steal from, and I can never remember who originally said this, but we overestimate what we can achieve in 1 year and underestimate what we can achieve in 10. This is the extent. This is not Shanghai or places that are known for incredibly rapid change. This is right here in North America, and it shows that in a relatively short period of time, you can have fundamental transformations, powerful transformations within 10 or 20 years. You can either do that in an incredibly poor way if you have a disconnect between your vision and your planning and your actual implementation, or you can do something pretty remarkable. And we'd like to think in Vancouver, although we are not perfect by any means, that we've done a pretty good job of matching the vision over many successive political councils and the ultimate building of the city. Thanks very much.